They're staying 2 Monday.
Nice.
Yeah, they still they're either half an hour or
Okay, we're recording. So we're
Okay.
here in Teaneck, New Jersey for my father, Gabriel Kassovitz's 80th birthday. Admei Avias Shana, and his lovely sister, Aunt Evelyn Harris, came from Indiana to join us. So, for posterity's sake, and we should all look at these things for many, many years to come, I wanted to get some sort of history of my father and his sisters and where they came from and their ancestors. And so this is a good opportunity to do that. So my father suggested that you, Aunt Evelyn, do most of the talking because he thinks you're going to have a better memory of what happened.
Okay.
She'll remember Plopish
And knowing my dad, he'll be more than happy to interject when he thinks you've made a mistake.
I do remember Plopish, where we grew up, but we were born in my grandmother, Paula Kassovitz's home. I have memories of the house. My sister and I, Lillian, disagree as to my memories. I remember my grandmother having a fairly large bedroom. Remember, I was 6 years old when I left, so the large is really a term that may not apply. And she had a wardrobe in that house, in that room, in which a Torah was kept because of the number of males already in the house and Shabbat services. There were no shul. My father claimed there were 3.5 Jewish families in Plopish. Never found out who the half a family was. But I know
let me interrupt,
Of
Uncle.
course.
I interviewed Uncle Yoshi before he died. Last of my father's surviving brothers, he said there were 7 Jewish families. And I asked him that they used to have regular Shabbat services. He said only when he and Uncle Vilmush came home from the yeshiva did they have regular Shabbat
So where did they go for yeshiva?
either Nutchville or Nutvar.
What was that place, Bonnie? My wife's here. What was that place? Nutchville. They went to like the
A little
school, the
bar.
yeshiva. I guess it would be yeshiva Katana.
Nutvar.
With a T.
Not Jemushelet?
No. Jumushvili was the Hungarian name for Plopish. Tushna.
Oh, really? I didn't know
According to
that.
Pearl, according to my cousin Pearl, Kaszovitz Nadla, Uncle Vilmush and Uncle Yoshi may have been the only 2 of the brothers to go to yeshiva.
So let's start from the top. You said your grandmother was Paula Kaszovitz, and so who was she married to?
Yitzchak Kassovitzz.
She was married to Yitzchak Kassovitzz.
And Yitzchak's tombstone is in that small Jewish cemetery. And it's a very small cemetery, so I don't know where 7 families, unless they were buried in other towns.
No, there are graves not standing
Okay.
on the ground.
Okay.
There are tombstones rather on the ground. Am I right there? Weren't there a number
Level
of
with
tombstones?
ground.
There may be 1 or 2, but remember those families were left. When your father was talking about the 7 Jewish families, they took away the 7 Jewish families.
They took away, but there had been people.
So there may not be
There may have
the
been
tombstones of 7 Jewish families there.
The story I got is how the family got to Plopish
Yes.
was that my grandmother had a wealthy, well, I guess what they considered a wealthy uncle by the name of Goldstein. And she was one of 3 sisters, and this Mr. Goldstein, and I get this all from Robert and Pearl, because their father, my father's brother, Uncle Vilmush, told them a lot more than Daddy ever seemed to have told us. And he married off the 3 sisters. He married off his 3 nieces. He had no children of his own.
Okay.
And they moved to Plopish, and my grandfather moved to Plopish. I guess he bought him a house, and they moved to Plopish.
But the other sisters had moved somewhere else.
Well, one of the sisters was, what's his name? Ferry Klein's mother.
Oh, okay.
And the other sister was, what was that tall fellow?
Zilberstein.
It's Zilberstein.
Zilberstein's mother.
Okay, we're getting away from ourselves. So we've got grandparents. We have Paula married to Yitzchak, who then gave birth to whom?
They
In
had,
order.
they had 7 children. The oldest was Malvin, a girl, the only girl, and she died in the Holocaust. The next one was Yeno, after whom Joan is named. He died in the Holocaust. He had a family. Malvin's husband had died when she was young, and she had one daughter.
Do you know what his name was?
No.
Do you know what his last name was?
No.
Yes.
What-
Yes. I gotta
Friedman?
remember. There was. Remember there used to be Hungarian cleaning girl came around, and then they brought her husband, the man she was supposed to be engaged to, who survived the Holocaust. They brought him over, Dejo, David. I'll think of it at some point. Yes, that was his brother. That was his brother. That
Oh.
was Mulvin's husband was his brother.
Okay, no,
And I'll probably be able to get it from Robert or.
those weren't the people who moved out to Long Beach, were they?
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
No,
You don't
but I
remember
can-
their last name either.
No, it'll
Was
come
it
to me.
Klein?
but-
No, it wasn't
No,
Klein.
it wasn't
Klein. Fetty was Klein.
Okay.
And then, okay, we've gotten away. And then came my father.
And Yeno had a family, he had a wife and kids, and they all
He had a
perished.
wife and
That
children,
perished also in the Holocaust.
Also perished in the Holocaust.
2 children.
Then came my father, and we had already left. All of us had left Europe by the time. By 1937, we were all gone. By 1934, we were all gone. And then came Uncle Karoy. He had a wife and a family. The wife and the family perished in the Holocaust. Uncle Karoy survived, came to America. He married Anne Rose. Then came Uncle Yoji, had a wife and family. The family and the wife perished in the Holocaust. He survived. He moved to Israel first, and he married, and he had Tamima, one daughter. Then came Uncle Vilmush, and Uncle Vilmush had a wife and children. They died in the Holocaust. He survived. He came to first to France, then to America.
But in Europe he married.
Yes,
Zisu.
he married Aunt Zisu, and he had three children, whom I think all of you guys know, Robert and Pearl and Yoeli. And then there was Tibby. He was the youngest. He did not have a family and was not married until he survived the war. He moved to Israel and then later to America. He married, was later divorced. He has 2 sons, Yitzchak and Donnie, both of whom lived in America. And that's the family up until
So how
my
did-
generation.
So how
Our
did they
generation.
all? How did the husbands all survive and their families all die?
Well,
Okay. I maintain that they were part of the labor force. They were
Uncle
able to
Vilmush, well, I'm not quite sure. Uncle Vilmush was part of the labor force. They took
The Hungarian labor force?
They took the Jewish men were taken to Russia as laborers.
this was by the Germans,
They weren't
though.
as sold.
Yeah.
No, by the Hungarians.
But the Hungarians? Really?
They were laborers in the Hungarian
right.
army. Uncle Vilmush told me all this.
Oh, that's right.
They were laborers in the Hungarian army. They were not soldiers because they wouldn't take them in as Jews. They wouldn't take them in as soldiers. But they were laborers in the Hungarian army. And Uncle Vilmush told me that he saw Aunt Beatrice. Now, Aunt Beatrice is already my mother's side of the family, my father's side of the family. And Beatrice's husband, whose I believe name is Paul, he said he met him, he saw him in Russia. He was also part of the Hungarian labor force, and he died in Russia. And Uncle Vilmush told me an interesting story. He says, one day he was so cold, it was so bitter cold, he was so tired that he just lay down. He was going to die. He was not going to get up. He would have probably frozen to death. But he had a friend of his, kept kicking him and kicking him and kicking him until he got up.
What was the friend's
That's the
name?
way he survived.
Does he know? Did he remember the friend's name?
He never told that to me. He never told that to me.
And Tucky, by the way, also survived.
Tucky was in the
Maldi's
camps.
daughter. She was 16 by the time.
Tucky was who?
17.
Whose daughter?
17.
Malvin's daughter.
Malvin's daughter.
You remember her, Tucky?
Sure.
And she survived, and I
She survived.
think because she was able to perform labor, some kind of duties.
Well,
She
there
was
was
very
an-
beautiful.
And she was very pretty. When we took a trip to Plopish, Bonnie and I and Lillian and Jerry,
Some,
it was some interesting things there. And Lillian went around and said, that's the house we lived in, that's the house. She found a few, and we finally did find the house because there was a woman who came out to meet us who said this was the house that the Kaszovitz family lived in. She was living in it then.
right.
And she said that her father always told her not to forget us. And that's where the house was. The house she was living in was not the same house, she said. It had been rebuilt. and there was a well there, and she said to always keep that well. They weren't using it
Running.
anymore.
In
but
other
always
words,
to
don't
keep
cap
that
the well.
Don't, because that would remind them of the Kaszovitz family. And she told us that her father, when it was the Hungarian army that came, not the Germans, to take away the Jews in Plopish. And she said that her father offered to take Tucky and hide her. So I said, sure, she was 17 and very pretty.
By the way,
Why do they say not to forget the Kaszovitz family? Why do they care?
because they were neighbors, they were good friends.
Oh.
And they realized that the family had practically been disseminated, and therefore keep that well running water for the future, so that in memory of the family. When I went with Lillian and Ben and Connie and the children,
Paul.
and Paul, a man came over and asked. I don't think he spoke Hungarian, but he was able to ask me, Tucky. He wanted to know about Tucky. He had gone to school with Tucky, and sadly, I told him Tucky had just died a few months before that. But he remembered Tucky.
The trips we took 2 trips. Bonnie and I took 2 trips. One trip we took with David's family. And the first trip I remember, we had a terrific driver named Michael who translated for us. And he went around asking all the people, did you know the Kaszovitz? Did you know the Kaszovitz? That was in 1996. There were some older people coming in from the fields with their little tools. They were still peasants working. And the older people remembered Uncle Tibby, and they remembered the ones who had stayed and came back from after the war. They stayed a little on the Kara. They remembered them. But there was one man who was walking up looking for the cemetery, who was walking with his tools, one older man, and he would always ask about Shandor, our father. Do you remember Shandor? So the man thought for a minute. He said, Shandor, Zuckerschnaps. In other words, that he made whiskey, sweet whiskey. And he used to make, Daddy told us he had made, he took over his father's business when his father died, making Schlimmerwitz.
By the way, would you like a bottle
and
of
not paying taxes. And then that man said, we asked some other people, Tucky, he said, oh yes, he was translated to us. Tucky, she liked me.
When I say would you like, when I went initially with Paula and I went with my father.
1986.
Right. There were still people there who could speak Hungarian. The mayor's wife, who was a teacher and spoke Hungarian, made us feel very, very welcome. Insisted we come into her home and prepared lunch for us, which, we ate the cucumbers and we ate the tomatoes and we drank the soda. She made the Wiener Schnitzel. It really, and apologized that her home wasn't that nice. She was redoing her kitchen like we do in America. The other interesting thing is that other people would just wander in. In one case, there was a girl, maybe 10 years old, holding a baby and pointing to us, to the baby. In other words, we were novel.
Right.
You talk about the women who lived in that house. On the second trip that I made with Paula and Connie, etc., the woman insisted on giving us some apples. She insisted on giving us something to drink and handed us woven items. I still have them. One, she said her mother was still, the old lady was still living, and the other one she had made. She wanted to give us gifts to take with us as memories. So it really, the third time I went though, we finally found somebody who could speak some Hungarian, and he too was very, very, really gracious. And by the way, I could not remember the name for cemetery in Hungarian. I could not retrieve that name.
Scimitar.
In Polish, in Romania, the guy, Michael referred to the Scimitar Evrei.
Scimitar Evrei.
But that's not
In
Hungarian.
Romanian.
No, he spoke Hungarian. I couldn't come up with a Hungarian. An elderly man. Anyway, he saw the children. He immediately took a ladder next to a cherry tree so they could go and pick cherries. He had a rabbit hatch. He took out 3 bunnies so each one of the children could hold one little bunny. And again, insisted on feeding us. I actually saw the woman have a bowl of fresh eggs go into her kitchen, and 20 minutes later, we were served hard-boiled eggs.
Did what you said there was a name? What's the name for Plopish in Hungarian?
Gyümölcs élet, which means
I never
plum.
knew that.
Yeah, my mother told me.
Okay.
Juma Shalit. Mother always told us that the plums in Plopish were the sweetest plums you ever tasted.
But they're-
And when I went there, when we were there in 1996, Bonnie and I and Jerry and Lillian, I took some of the plums off the trees, and she was right. It was the sweetest plums you ever tasted.
So that's a good segue. What about your mother's family?
Okay, our mother's family, we know the aunts and uncles because they were here in America before us, my mother's siblings, or at least 3 of them, and their spouses. We never knew our grandparents. They died.
Well, the father died long before, but my mother's mother died 3 weeks before after I was born. That's the
Oh,
reason
really?
that's what I
What were their names?
The father.
Fanny,
Gedalia, your father.
and then Fanny Goldberg, her maiden name is on there, Goldberg Baumohl.
Well, yes, and my father's mother's family name was Sunyag, I think.
Sonyosh.
Sunyoj? Sunyoj.
From it, Sonyosh was your father's mother.
What was, and that I was told that was, what was the translate again?
No, her father's mother, I thought, was Paula.
Yeah, but the maiden name, the last name, the
Which-
surname
Oh,
was Sonyosh, but then Robert tells me it had been changed. It was really, her maiden name was really Goldstein, like her uncle, but they changed it to make it more Hungarian. And I think the translation of that word was not bed bugs, but some kind of bug.
No, could be.
Yeah,
could be,
yeah.
Could be. Some kind
That's
of a
what,
bug, yeah.
Robert and Pearl seem to have an awful lot of information. But on our mother's family, we really,
where do they come from?
Bogomir,
Bogomir, they lived in Bogomir. He was a butcher, I gather.
yes.
Our maternal
Yes.
grandfather was a butcher, I gather. My mother's maiden name was Baumohl, which is really, I think, more of a Germanic name.
But I know
than a
somebody
Hungarian name.
in France that had the name of Baumohl, spelled exactly the same way.
Baumohl, I've run into the name, spelled different ways, Baumel, I've seen
Right.
it. But basically it means, derivation is the German word for tree, Baum,
Baum.
like Tannenbaum, and you find it frequently.
And what was your grandmother's maiden name? Your maternal grandmother? Your maternal grand
I have it down on that your type thing as Goldberg.
Goldberg. All right.
I never knew.
And Fanny, what was her Hebrew name? Anybody know? Fagala, because it had to be Fagala. That's Lillian's. Yeah,
Lillian's
name.
Hebrew name is Fega?
Fagala.
Fegala.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, little bird instead of a big bird.
Right.
It has a different connotation
That's right.
in the modern era.
So they had how many children? The Baumohls,
Okay.
Gedalia and
Now
Fega.
that gets into a little family history you may or may not want on this tape.
Well, no, it's not that.
They had.
Oh
they
yes,
had-
no, I'm aware. Yeah, no. I
Aunt
know.
Esty was the oldest, and Aunt Rose was the second oldest. They came to America as single women. They were brought over by somebody we called Uncle Alex.
Alex Baumohl.
That was their first cousin. He was a man we knew. We had seen around a lot in America.
Right.
They came over in 1922. I don't know what years they got married. Aunt Esty married Uncle Lipo, and Aunt Rose married Uncle Dave. And of course, we knew them very well as we
Right.
grew
Lipo
up.
Frankovitz,
Yeah.
Dave
Frankfurt
Simon.
and David Simon. They brought over Uncle Albert, I think, before
First.
they brought us up
Correct.
over. And Uncle Albert married Aunt Etta.
Zimmerman Baumohl.
Whose maiden name was Zimmerman, and who we knew very well, and we knew her family very well, and because they were all in America. Now, they had another sister. They didn't have any children. Aunt Rose, Aunt Esty, and Uncle Albert didn't have any children. They had another sister, Aunt Bertush.
How did they all get to America?
Aunt
Yes,
Esty and Aunt Rose, Uncle Alex brought them
Oh,
over.
I'm sorry, you
And
just said
then
that. Yeah.
they-
My guess is he brought them over because they weren't young women anymore, not so young.
And they weren't
he
married.
was here. I don't know how he got here, Alex Baumohl. I don't know how he got here. But he brought them over, and then they brought over Uncle Albert, and then eventually, you say Aunt Esty was the one who brought us over.
Yes, yeah.
Uh,
Because I don't think
Along
Uncle
his
Dave
mind,
was that economically wealthy, but Uncle Lipo had
And
already
Uncle Lipo
started to
was-
make money.
by the time we were here, when I was 3 years old, it would have been 1934 on our way to Uruguay. I think Uncle Lipo already had a supermarket.
He did.
He had a supermarket already.
27th and Capital.
Okay. And
And so your maternal grandparents were they had both
No,
passed
they were-
away because before you were even born, because you said Aunt Lillian is named after your grandmother, and your name
No,
and my father's.
maternal grandmother died about 3 weeks after I did.
Okay, and
After
your
I was born, rather.
and my father's named after
They died.
your
Correct.
maternal grandfather.
So the two
So they were
grandfathers.
both dead when you were.
Gedalia and Yitzchak.
And
Yeah, Yitzchak.
Oh, that's
Our paternal grandfather died when our
17.
father was. We've had different versions
would
of the
have,
story.
he would have died in 1916, even before World War One. If
Well,
Pop
World
was
War I
17,
World War One was already going on in Europe.
in Europe, that's
Yeah,
right, 16 it would have been, yeah.
My father always said that told us his father died when my father was 17, which would have been 1918. Daddy was born in 1901.
Okay, 1918.
But Robert tells me that based upon what his father, Uncle Vilmush, told him, that Vilmush was 13 bar mitzvah when his father died the year he was bar mitzvah, so that would have made my father about 19. So we have those two different versions of when our paternal grandfather died. But anyway, getting back to my mother's family, Aunt Bertush, who stayed in Europe, there were 3 children. She had 3 children. All died in the Holocaust. And her husband, I just mentioned before, Uncle Paul, Uncle Vilmush, told me Paul died in Russia.
Who was Paul?
Paul was
Bertush's husband.
Bertush's husband was Paul.
Uh-huh.
And he was a laborer in the Hungarian army, and Uncle Vilmush told me he saw him in
Right.
Russia.
And the photo that I have of him, he was a sickly looking man even before, I think.
What was his
the
last name?
Holocaust.
We don't, they appear. You found them on the Holocaust. Somebody
Paul.
entered them on the Holocaust
Yeah.
registry.
Uncle,
Yes. So we
Okay.
have their names somewhere. I forget where.
Okay.
You found it.
I found, but how would I have known if it was in Kaszovitz?
you may have
You were looking for Baumohl.
Oh,
And I
Baumohl.
guess Bertush's
maiden name.
Maybe.
maiden name was on there.
Okay.
You really
I
found
think you found it. Yes, you found it. Remember?
Okay.
Do you remember finding it?
I remember finding names, and I
Yeah,
remember the
yeah,
name
you
Paul,
found
but I
them.
didn't.
You found them. We looked for them and you found them.
Okay.
And somebody had entered in. There was nobody who we recognized who had entered the names in.
Uh huh.
I could,
Now there were 3 other boys in the
yeah,
family.
we found out later.
Well, mother always referred to the boys. She never told us anything about them. Just said the boys.
Her siblings.
Her
Her
siblings.
siblings.
It was clear her siblings. She referred to the boys, and Aunt Rose, when Aunt Rose was fairly old, and we used their husbands. Aunt Rose, Uncle Lipo and Uncle Dave had passed away. The husbands of Aunt Esty and Aunt Rose. So we used to go for to Pesach. Aunt Rose, we always went with Aunt Rose, and then Aunt Esty stayed with them for Pesach. They stayed with us. Mother already passed away. Daddy was with us, with our family, Bonnie and I and our family. And I asked Aunt Rose, I said, Mother always talked to the boys. Who were they? And she told me their names. Their names that she told me were Ignatz, Aaron, and Samuel. That's all she said. She didn't say anything more about them. But then when Yossi Baumohl, who would be our second cousin, his father was a brother of Uncle Alex.
Right.
And Uncle Alex, as we said, and his father would have been a first cousin of my mother. So he told me, Yossi Baumohl told me, that 2 of them, from what he described, appeared to be Mongoloids, and one he said was a raving lunatic who they had to keep in a room, locked up in a room. And he told me that Bertush stayed back in Europe. She would have been brought over to America too by Aunt Esty, but she stayed back in Europe to take care of them. And Aunt Rose told me that she told Aunt Bertush she wanted to bring her 3 children over before the Holocaust, when Europe was already pretty much in flames, in order that they were able to, she said she would have been able to rescue the children, but Aunt Bertush said no, she could not bear to be separated from her children, so of course they all died in the
By the way, your
Holocaust.
description of the 3 brothers, Aunt Rose finally told me.
She did tell you about them.
Yeah, because I told you that Pearl's son was visiting her, and we got her talking, and she started to describe how they behaved, and for that is what I assumed, that they were
It matched,
retarded
it
and.
matched what Yossi Baumohl
But
said.
my memory is that she talked about two of them, and I'm very not good at names, so I didn't remember that. I may have written it down somewhere, but I can't find the paper, of course.
Now, all these families that perished in the Holocaust, did you ever hear where they died, where they were taken to, how they died?
Okay, I thought they
No,
died
it
in
was
Auschwitz.
Auschwitz.
No. Yossi Baumohl told me they didn't die in Auschwitz. They died in Bergen-Belsen. Not Birkenau, which is next to Auschwitz, but Bergen-Belsen. And when I went to Auschwitz, I did try to look, because they have the Germans kept great records. I couldn't find their names. Could not find their names anywhere. Now, not as Baumohl, not as Kaszovitz. And he said it was Bergen-Belsen.
I gotta ask Robert if he knows. I don't know how many of my father's brothers were laborers with the Hungarian army. I always got the impression Uncle Yeno died in the
Yes.
probably died in the camps.
Mm-hmm. That I thought too, yeah.
Yeah, that I'm assuming. I don't get the. I think Uncle Yoshi was in the camps and survived.
That
But I
could
don't
be.
know.
Any number of people were in the camps. They were
Yeah,
not
but do you
lucky
know where
enough,
they were?
not that the finger didn't point to
But
them.
do you know whether he was?
The only one that, the only name that Yossi Baumohl gave me was Bergen-Belsen.
Yeah, but do you know?
And I have not traced it, yeah.
Do you know where Uncle Kara and
No,
Uncle Yoshi?
no.
I'll have to ask Robert. He does all this, and I would assume if anybody has the information, he and Pearl have the information
Okay.
because they would have gotten it from Uncle Vilmos.
Okay, so now we're going to switch tapes, and then we're going to get to your immediate family history.